Picture this: you're sitting at a family wedding, surrounded by relatives who've spent years treating you like a disappointment, when suddenly your uncle stands up and calls you worthless in front of everyone. The humiliation burns through you. As 40 pairs of eyes stare, some with pity, others with agreement. You're reaching for your purse, ready to leave forever, when 3 men in perfectly tailored black suits appear behind your chair like shadows. The room falls silent. Your uncle's confident smirk falters. And then you hear the words that change everything: "Ma'am, we have a situation. The senator's wife is on line 1, and she's authorized $3 million for emergency damage control." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Sophia Reyes, 32 years old, and until that Saturday afternoon at the Fairmont Princess Resort in Scottsdale, my entire extended family believed I was the ultimate failure of the Reyes bloodline. Growing up in a tight-knit Mexican-American family in Phoenix meant that success was measured in very specific terms: stable jobs, marriage, children, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to family gatherings without embarrassing anyone. By those standards, I was a walking disaster. My story begins in a modest neighborhood near South Phoenix, where my parents, Carmen and Roberto Reyes, built their lives around hard work and traditional values. Dad worked construction for 30 years, his hands permanently stained with cement and calloused from decades of manual labor. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in Paradise Valley, taking pride in her reputation for making homes sparkle. They saved every penny to buy a small house with 3 bedrooms, where they raised 4 children with the absolute certainty that education and respect would lift us higher than they'd ever climbed. My older siblings hit every mark our parents set. Maria became a registered nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital, married her high school sweetheart, and produced 2 beautiful grandchildren who could do no wrong in our grandmother's eyes. Carlos followed Dad into construction but quickly moved into project management, earning respect and steady income that allowed him to buy his own home by 25. Anna took a different path, joining the Phoenix Police Department, where she rose through the ranks to become a detective, earning both pride and worry from our parents who celebrated her success while praying for her safety every shift. Then there was me, the baby of the family who showed early promise with straight A's through high school, earned a scholarship to Arizona State University, and then seemingly threw it all away by majoring in communications instead of something practical like nursing or business. While my siblings were building careers that our parents could easily explain to friends and neighbors, I graduated with a degree that prompted the same question at every family gathering: but what do you actually do with that? The truth was complicated, and in a family that valued straightforward answers, complication was often mistaken for failure. After college, I'd started working for a small public relations firm in Phoenix, handling accounts for local businesses and learning the art of managing public perception. The work fascinated me. There was something compelling about crafting messages that could change how people viewed a company, a person, or a situation. I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of how information moved through communities and how the right words at the right time could shift entire narratives. But explaining crisis communication to a family gathering was like trying to describe the color blue to someone who'd never seen the sky. When relatives asked what I did for work, my attempts at explanation were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. "She works with computers," my mother would say, which wasn't entirely wrong but missed the point entirely. "Something about advertising," my father would add, though that wasn't quite right either. The real challenge began when I left the PR firm after 3 years to start my own consultancy. The decision horrified my parents, who equated steady employment with security and couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily give up a predictable paycheck for the uncertainty of freelancing. "Mija, you had a good job," my mother pleaded. "Why would you throw that away to work for yourself? What if no one hires you?" Their fears seemed justified during my first year of independence. I struggled to find clients, worked from my tiny apartment, and lived on savings that dwindled faster than I'd anticipated. Family dinners became exercises in enduring well-meaning advice and increasingly pointed questions about when I planned to return to real employment. My Uncle Victor, my father's older brother and the unofficial patriarch of our extended family, was particularly vocal about my choices. Uncle Victor had immigrated from Guadalajara as a teenager, worked his way through community college while supporting his family, and built a successful plumbing business that employed 12 people. In his mind, success meant building something tangible, employing others, and providing services that people clearly needed. My work existed in an abstract realm he couldn't grasp, and his confusion quickly evolved into dismissal. "What exactly do you sell?" he would ask at family gatherings, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer was nothing of value. "Who pays money for talking?" In my business, people have broken pipes, I fix them, they pay me. Simple. What problem do you solve that people actually need solved? His question stung because I couldn't give him the answers he wanted to hear. My clients were beginning to include people and companies whose names couldn't be mentioned in casual conversation. I was developing expertise in crisis management, which meant helping individuals and organizations navigate their worst moments when the wrong word or mishandled situation could destroy reputations, careers, or companies. The work required absolute confidentiality, and success was often measured by keeping situations out of the news rather than generating positive coverage. My breakthrough came when a mid-level tech executive in Phoenix faced a sexual harassment allegation that threatened both his career and his company's upcoming merger. Through careful communication strategy, media management, and stakeholder coordination, I helped him address the situation transparently while protecting the interests of all parties involved. The case was resolved quietly, the merger proceeded successfully, and word of my effectiveness began spreading through networks I couldn't have accessed through traditional marketing. Within 18 months, my client base had shifted from local businesses to high-profile individuals facing reputation threats. A country music star needed help managing fallout from a DUI arrest. A prominent surgeon required crisis communication when a malpractice lawsuit became public. A real estate mogul's son needed strategic guidance when his college partying videos went viral at the worst possible time. Each case built my reputation in circles where discretion was paramount and failure wasn't an option. The financial rewards followed quickly. Crisis management for high-profile clients commanded premium rates because the stakes were enormous. A poorly handled scandal could cost someone millions in lost opportunities, endorsements, or business relationships. Clients who faced existential threats to their careers or companies were willing to pay significant sums for expertise that could preserve their futures. My fees evolved from hundreds of dollars for local business communications to six-figure retainers for comprehensive crisis management campaigns. But success in my field came with isolation. The more prominent my clients became, the less I could share about my work with anyone, including family. Non-disclosure agreements weren't just professional courtesy, they were legal requirements backed by severe financial penalties. When a client paid me to manage their crisis, they were purchasing not just my strategic expertise but my absolute silence about their situation. This created an impossible dynamic with my family. As my income grew and my client list became more impressive, I found myself less able to explain what I did or why it mattered. My work existed in a world of private jets, emergency conference calls, and million-dollar decisions, but to my family, I still appeared to be a freelancer working from home without a real job or steady income. The gap between perception and reality widened with each successful case. I purchased a home in Scottsdale, a beautiful Adobe-style house with a pool and mountain views, but told my family I was renting it to avoid questions about how I could afford such luxury. I drove a modest Honda Civic to family gatherings while my BMW stayed in the garage, unwilling to face the interrogation that visible success would provoke. Most painfully, I watched my parents worry about my financial stability while I quietly contributed to their mortgage payments through anonymous money transfers they attributed to a windfall from their insurance company. The secrecy became a burden that grew heavier with each family interaction. At my cousin Rachel's engagement party, I listened to her detail her promotion to charge nurse while I'd spent that morning on a conference call with attorneys representing a Fortune 500 CEO whose company was facing a federal investigation. When my brother Carlos bought a new truck and the family celebrated his financial milestone, I'd just finished negotiating a contract worth more than his annual salary for a 3-week crisis management campaign. The worst part wasn't the money or the professional recognition I couldn't share. It was watching my parents' faces during family gatherings when relatives asked about my career. The slight embarrassment, the defensive explanations, the way they'd quickly redirect conversations to my siblings' achievements. They loved me unconditionally, but they couldn't understand or explain my success because I couldn't give them the information they needed to do so. Uncle Victor became increasingly vocal about his disappointment in my choices. "She's 32 and still playing games," he would say, not bothering to lower his voice. "No husband, no children, no real career. What did we sacrifice for if our children won't build anything solid?" His wife, Aunt Elena, would nod sympathetically while suggesting I consider returning to school for something practical like accounting or nursing. The breaking point had been building for months before Rachel's wedding. My cousin had chosen me as a bridesmaid, which meant months of wedding-related family gatherings where my lifestyle and choices became frequent topics of discussion. While other bridesmaids talked about their husbands, careers, and children, I deflected questions and changed subjects, unable to share that I'd spent the previous week in New York managing communications for a tech billionaire whose cryptocurrency Investments had become the subject of federal scrutiny. Rachel's wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in early April at the Fairmont Princess Resort, a stunning venue in Scottsdale that cost more than many people's annual salaries. The guest list included our entire extended family, plus friends and colleagues from Rachel's hospital work. I'd carefully chosen my outfit, a simple navy dress from Nordstrom that was elegant but not expensive looking, paired with modest jewelry that wouldn't prompt questions about my spending habits. The ceremony itself was beautiful, held in the resort's garden pavilion overlooking the mountains, with Rachel radiant in a dress that had required months of saving from her nursing salary. As we stood at the altar, I felt genuinely happy for my cousin while simultaneously calculating whether I could discreetly check my phone during the reception. I was managing a sensitive situation for a prominent attorney whose divorce proceedings had become public, and developments could require immediate response. The reception moved to the resort's ballroom, decorated with soft lighting and spring flowers that created an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Our family occupied 3 round tables near the front, with the traditional hierarchy determining seating arrangements. My parents sat with Uncle Victor and Aunt Elena at the main family table, along with my siblings and their spouses. I found myself relegated to what everyone still called the kids' table, despite being 32 years old, seated with teenage cousins and family friends' children who seemed as confused by the arrangement as I was. The evening proceeded predictably, with toasts that celebrated Rachel's achievements as a medical professional and her new husband's success as an engineer. Uncle Victor made a speech about family values and building solid foundations, with pointed glances in my direction that weren't lost on anyone present. As dinner progressed, the conversation at my table focused on college plans and part-time jobs, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated and frustrated. The moment that changed everything began innocuously enough. Uncle Victor had consumed several glasses of wine during dinner and was feeling expansive, moving between tables to share wisdom with anyone within earshot. When he reached our table, his attention focused on me with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting for the right opportunity to make a point. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying across the nearby tables, "you're 32 years old. When are you going to stop pretending to work and get a real job?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question silenced our table and attracted attention from neighboring guests. "Look at Rachel, look at your siblings. They built careers, they contribute to society, they have something to show for their lives." I felt my face flush with familiar embarrassment, but before I could respond, he continued. "You sit at home playing on your computer, calling it work, but what do you actually produce? What value do you add to the world?" His voice grew louder, emboldened by wine and the attention he was receiving. "Your parents sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay them? By refusing to grow up and take responsibility?" The ballroom seemed to quiet around us, though other conversations continued. Our family tables were definitely listening, and I could see my parents' faces reflecting the familiar mixture of embarrassment and defensive love that appeared whenever my career became a topic of discussion. Uncle Victor wasn't finished. "You know what the problem is with your generation? You think you're too good for honest work. You want everything handed to you without earning it. Look at this wedding, look at what Rachel accomplished. She helps sick children, she makes a difference. But you?" He gestured dismissively in my direction. "You're completely worthless. 32 years old and nothing to show for it except some fantasy about working for yourself." The words hit like physical blows, each one carrying years of accumulated frustration and disappointment. The surrounding tables had definitely noticed the commotion now, and I could feel dozens of eyes focused on our interaction. My teenage cousins stared at their plates, mortified by the public scene unfolding around them. From the main family table, I could see my mother's horrified expression and my father's helpless anger at his brother's cruelty. "Worthless," Uncle Victor repeated, as if the word needed emphasis. "That's what happens when you don't build anything real. When you don't contribute anything meaningful. Your parents must be so disappointed." I was reaching for my purse, ready to leave the reception and quite possibly never return to another family gathering, when I felt a familiar presence behind my chair. Marcus, the head of my security detail, appeared at my shoulder with the silent professionalism that had made him invaluable during countless high-pressure situations. "Ms. Reyes," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by our table but not beyond, "we have a situation developing. Senator Harrison's office has been contacted by the Washington Post regarding the foundation story. They're requesting immediate consultation." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Uncle Victor's confident expression faltered as he processed the unexpected interruption. The teenagers at our table looked up with sudden interest, while nearby adults began paying closer attention to what had shifted from family drama to something entirely different. Marcus continued, his tone respectful but urgent. Mrs. Harrison is on secure line 1. She's authorized emergency protocols and is requesting your immediate strategic input. The story publishes in 90 minutes unless we can provide alternative narrative frameworks. Behind Marcus, I could see James and David, the other members of my security team, positioned discreetly near the ballroom entrance. Their presence wasn't obvious to most guests, but anyone paying attention would notice 3 impeccably dressed men who clearly weren't wedding attendees and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional security personnel. Uncle Victor found his voice first. Who are these people? What's going on here? Marcus turned to address him with polite professionalism. Private security, sir. Ms. Reyes specializes in crisis management for high-profile clients. We're needed to coordinate immediate response to a developing situation that could significantly impact a sitting United States senator's career. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I could see comprehension dawning on faces around. Mia's family members began processing what they'd just heard. Rachel had abandoned her table hopping entirely and was making her way toward us, her wedding dress rustling as she moved quickly across the ballroom floor. My parents looked shell-shocked, my mother clutching my father's arm as if the ground beneath them had shifted. My siblings wore expressions of complete bewilderment, their familiar understanding of family hierarchy suddenly meaningless. Mrs. Harrison mentioned that Congressman Bradley has already been contacted by the same reporter. Marcus continued, checking his secure tablet. She's concerned about coordinated coverage that could implicate multiple elected officials. The foundation's donor list apparently includes several high-profile individuals who prefer to maintain privacy about their charitable giving. The complexity of the situation was becoming clear to anyone within earshot, and I could see relatives frantically whispering to each other as they tried to understand the scope of what I handled professionally. Uncle Victor finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. You work for senators? Politicians? How is that possible? Before I could answer, James approached with additional information that made the situation even more dramatic. Ms. Reyes, we've just received confirmation that ABC News is also working on a related story. Mrs. Harrison's assistant says they received a call from a producer asking about the connection between the Senator's Foundation and the infrastructure bill he sponsored last year. This appears to be expanding beyond a single news outlet. The ballroom had essentially transformed into an impromptu crisis command center, with my security team efficiently coordinating communications while my family watched in stunned silence. Other wedding guests were beginning to notice the commotion, and I could see phones appearing as people started recording or texting about the unusual scene unfolding. David, the third member of my security team, materialized beside Marcus with a laptop case. Ma'am, I've established the secure connection you requested. Mrs. Harrison's legal team is standing by, and the Senator's communications director is en route to Washington for emergency meetings. They're requesting your assessment of narrative, vulnerability and recommended response protocols. The professional language seemed to hit my family like a foreign dialect. These weren't terms they associated with any work they understood, yet the urgency and financial scope made it impossible to dismiss as anything less than critically important. My cousin Miguel, the family lawyer, leaned forward with intense interest, clearly recognizing legal terminology and crisis protocols that suggested a level of professional sophistication he hadn't expected. $3.2 million. My sister Anna repeated slowly, her police training making her naturally skeptical of sudden revelations. For 3 days of work? What exactly do you do that's worth that much money? I looked around at my family's faces, understanding that this moment required complete honesty after years of careful omission. I prevent powerful people from losing everything when their worst moments become public, I said simply. When a senator's foundation is about to be exposed for financial irregularities that could end his career and trigger federal investigations, he needs someone who can manage the narrative, coordinate with media outlets, and develop strategies that preserve his political future. That expertise is rare, and when someone's entire life's work hangs in the balance, they're willing to pay premium rates for the best possible outcome. Uncle Victor sank into an empty chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. You're telling me that you're some kind of crisis expert? That politicians call you when they're in trouble? Marcus handed me an earpiece and gestured toward the secure phone. Mrs. Harrison is requesting immediate consultation. She says the senator is prepared to withdraw from the re-election race unless we can develop a viable strategy within the next hour. The family's reputation and his political legacy are both at stake. The weight of the situation was becoming apparent to everyone present. This wasn't just about money or professional success, it was about a United States senator's career potentially ending unless I could provide strategic guidance within an impossibly tight timeline. The responsibility was enormous, and my family was witnessing the kind of pressure that defined my daily professional life. Rachel finally reached our table, her face flushed from hurrying across the ballroom in her wedding dress. "Sophia, what's happening? People are saying you work for politicians? That you're some kind of crisis consultant? I don't understand what's going on." I took the earpiece from Marcus, understanding that the next few minutes would determine not only Senator Harrison's political future but also how my family understood my place in their world. "Rachel, I'm sorry this is happening at your wedding, but I need to take this call. A senator's career is about to end unless I can help him navigate a crisis that breaks in 75 minutes. The ballroom had essentially stopped functioning as a wedding celebration. My mother's hand moved to cover her mouth in shock. My father leaned forward, straining to hear better. Rachel, who had been greeting guests at other tables, stopped mid-conversation and stared in our direction. I stood up slowly, finding my voice and my dignity simultaneously. "Uncle Victor, I need to take this call. When someone's political career hangs in the balance and they have 90 minutes to prevent a scandal that could destroy their reputation, they call me because I'm one of the few people in the country who can manage crisis communication at this level." The transformation in the room's energy was palpable. Conversations at neighboring tables had stopped entirely as guests tried to understand what was happening. My teenage cousins stared at me with new expressions, suddenly seeing their boring older cousin in an entirely different light. Marcus handed me a secure phone. "Mrs. Harrison is holding on encrypted line 1. She's confirmed authorization for full crisis protocols, including media coordination and stakeholder management. Mr. Peterson from the senator's office is standing by on line 2. Uncle Victor's face had gone through several color changes, settling on a pale shade that matched his growing realization that his assessment of my career might have been significantly incorrect. Crisis management? For a senator? I don't understand what's happening here." "The Harrison family represents one of our long-term clients," I explained, accepting the phone from Marcus while maintaining eye contact with my uncle. "When Senator Harrison's family foundation comes under media scrutiny that could impact his re-election campaign and potentially trigger a federal investigation, they require immediate strategic communication support. The Washington Post has information that could end his political career unless we can provide context and alternative frameworks within the next hour and a half." The ballroom had essentially stopped functioning as a wedding reception and become an audience for a revelation that was rewriting everything my family thought they knew about me. I could see relatives straining to hear, phones discreetly appearing as people began Googling my name, and expressions shifting from confusion to amazement as the implications became clear. James approached with a tablet displaying what appeared to be financial information. "Ms. Reyes, Mrs. Harrison has approved the emergency retainer. $3.2 million for comprehensive crisis management over the next 72 hours, including media coordination, stakeholder communication, and narrative development. Should I confirm acceptance?" The number hit the room like a physical force. Several people gasped audibly. Uncle Victor's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. From the main family table, I could hear my sister Maria whisper, "Did he just say $3 million, to her husband?" I looked around the ballroom at my family's stunned faces, understanding that this moment was changing not just how they saw me but how I saw myself. For years, I'd hidden my success to avoid difficult conversations and protect my clients' privacy. But standing there with my security team, fielding a crisis call worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, I realized that my shame had been misplaced. I wasn't a failure who disappointed my family. I was a professional whose work had value beyond anything they'd imagined. "Confirm the retainer," I told James, then turned back to Uncle Victor. "I'm sorry to cut this conversation short, but I have a senator's career to save. We can continue this discussion later, assuming you still think I'm worthless." The silence that followed was profound and transformative. In the space of 5 minutes, every assumption my family had made about my life and career had been completely shattered, replaced by a reality they were only beginning to understand. The secure phone felt heavy in my hand as I watched my family's world reshape itself around this single moment of truth. Uncle Victor stood frozen beside our table, his wine glass forgotten, his confident demeanor crumbling as he processed what had just occurred. The man who had spent years dismissing my career as worthless was now witnessing a $3 million crisis management consultation unfold at his niece's wedding reception. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Ms. Reyes, we have approximately 85 minutes before the Post goes live with their story. Mrs. Harrison is requesting immediate strategic consultation regarding the Foundation's financial records and the Senator's potential exposure. She's particularly concerned about the timing, given that the Senator announced his re-election campaign just last week. I could feel the weight of dozens of stares as wedding guests tried to understand what was happening. But communication as a standalone professional skill seemed abstract and unnecessary. The skepticism deepened when I graduated and started working for a small public relations firm in Phoenix rather than applying for traditional entry-level positions. With large corporations that offered structured training programs and clear advancement paths. My starting salary was modest, and my job responsibilities seemed vague when I tried to explain them during family conversations. "So you write newsletters and press releases?" my mother would ask, trying to understand what I did during my workdays. "How is that different from what secretaries do?" My early assignments involved writing promotional materials for local businesses, coordinating small events, and managing social media accounts for clients who were just beginning to understand the importance of online presence. The work was legitimate and necessary, but it didn't translate well when relatives asked about my job duties or professional accomplishments. I couldn't point to dramatic results or significant achievements because my contributions were part of larger marketing efforts whose success depended on multiple factors beyond my control. The comparison with my siblings became a constant source of family tension because their career progress was easily measured and celebrated while mine remained difficult to explain or appreciate. When Maria completed her nursing program and immediately found full-time employment at Phoenix Children's Hospital, the family celebrated with a dinner party that acknowledged her achievement and the stable career path she had chosen. Her work schedule, benefits package, and advancement opportunities were topics of conversation that everyone could understand and respect. Carlos's transition from construction work to project management represented upward mobility that validated my parents' belief in education as a tool for advancement. When he received his first promotion and the salary increase that came with it, the family gathered to acknowledge his success and discuss the houses and developments he was helping to build. His work produced visible results that could be visited and evaluated, making his professional progress tangible and impressive. Anna's decision to join the Phoenix Police Department generated family concern because of the inherent dangers, but her graduation from the police academy was treated as a major achievement that demonstrated her commitment to serving the community. Her promotion to detective 3 years later prompted another family celebration because everyone understood that advancement in law enforcement required demonstrating competence and earning respect from colleagues and supervisors. Meanwhile, my professional development seemed to lack clear milestones or dramatic achievements that warranted family recognition. When I left the PR firm to start my own consultancy, the decision was viewed as a step backward rather than forward. Because entrepreneurship represented increased risk and uncertainty rather than advancement. "Why would you leave a steady job to work for yourself?" my father asked, genuinely concerned about my financial security. "What if you can't find enough clients? What if the business fails?" My attempts to explain the potential benefits of independent consulting were met with skepticism rooted in my family's experience with small business ownership. Uncle Victor had built his plumbing business gradually over many years, starting with a single truck and basic tools before expanding to employ multiple technicians and serve larger commercial clients. His success had required significant capital investment, years of building customer relationships, and the development of specialized technical skills that were clearly valuable in the marketplace. My consulting business seemed to lack these fundamental elements because I worked from home with minimal overhead, served clients through phone calls and email rather than face-to-face interactions, and provided strategic advice rather than tangible services. "What do you sell?" Uncle Victor would ask repeatedly. "What do people buy from you that they can't get somewhere else cheaper?" The financial aspects of my consulting work created additional confusion because my income was irregular and project-based rather than salary-based, making it difficult for my family to assess my professional success through their familiar metrics. During my first year of independence, there were months when I earned very little and others when single projects generated significant income, but I couldn't explain these fluctuations without revealing details about specific clients and their situations. My family's attempts to help during this transition period often felt like attacks on my professional competence and life choices. When Uncle Victor offered me a position answering phones at his plumbing business, he presented it as an opportunity to gain experience with business operations while earning steady income. When I declined, he interpreted my refusal as pride or unrealistic expectations rather than confidence in my chosen career path. "Sophia thinks she's too good for honest work," he told my parents after I turned down his offer. "She wants to be some kind of executive without paying her dues or learning how businesses actually operate. That's not how success works in the real world." Similar offers came from other family members who believed they were helping me find direction and stability. My cousin Rachel suggested I apply for administrative positions at the hospital where she worked, emphasizing the excellent benefits and job security that came with healthcare employment. My brother Carlos mentioned openings for marketing coordinators with the construction company that employed him, positions that would provide steady income and opportunities to learn about the housing industry. Each of these suggestions was offered with genuine concern for my welfare, but they reflected my family's inability to recognize that I was building expertise in a specialized field rather than floundering without direction. Their advice was based on the assumption that my consulting work was a temporary phase that would eventually lead to traditional employment once I accepted the need for stability and structure. The pattern of underestimation became particularly painful during holiday gatherings and family celebrations where career accomplishments were discussed and compared. At my cousin Miguel's law school graduation party, the conversation focused on his job prospects with established firms and the impressive starting salary he could expect as an attorney. When relatives asked about my work, my explanations about client confidentiality and strategic communication were met with polite nods that barely concealed their confusion and concern. "Sophia has her computer business," my mother would say when pressed to describe my career, using language that minimized my work while avoiding topics she didn't fully understand. "She helps companies with their advertising and things like that." The characterization was technically accurate but missed entirely the scope and sophistication of the crisis management work I was developing. The most frustrating aspect of this pattern was watching my family's emotional responses during these career discussions. I could see my parents' discomfort when relatives asked about my professional progress, their slight embarrassment when they couldn't provide impressive updates about my achievements, and their defensive efforts to redirect conversations toward my siblings' more conventional successes. Uncle Victor's commentary became increasingly pointed as I remained committed to independent consulting rather than seeking traditional employment. 5 years out of college and she still doesn't have a real job, he would say, not bothering to lower his voice during family gatherings. How long are we going to pretend that playing on computers is a career? When is she going to accept reality and find stable work? Conversations had ceased at nearby tables as guests strained to understand what was unfolding. The bride's family looked confused and concerned, while my relatives wore expressions ranging from shock to dawning pride as they began to grasp the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Mrs. Harrison," I said into the secure phone, my voice carrying across the silent table, "I've reviewed the preliminary information my team forwarded. Before we proceed, I need to understand the scope of potential exposure. Are we dealing with financial irregularities that could trigger IRS investigations, or are there additional concerns about donor privacy and political implications?" My family listened as I discussed federal agencies, media strategy, and political ramifications with the casual expertise of someone who navigated these waters regularly. Uncle Victor's face had gone pale as he realized the scope of responsibility I carried and the level of trust that prominent politicians placed in my judgment. "Yes, I understand the timing is problematic given the campaign announcement," I continued, aware that my relatives were hearing me discuss matters of national political significance. "We'll need to coordinate with the campaign's communications team while maintaining separation between the foundation's issues and the senator's official duties. The narrative framework needs to acknowledge oversight improvements while emphasizing the foundation's charitable impact and the senator's commitment to transparency." James approached with additional updates that further demonstrated the complexity of high-level crisis management. "Ms. Reyes, the senator's chief of staff is requesting a conference call with you, Mrs. Harrison, and the legal team in 15 minutes. They want to discuss potential timeline for voluntary disclosure versus reactive response strategies." The professional terminology and strategic considerations were clearly beyond anything my family had imagined when they thought about my work. This wasn't the vague computer work or advertising something that had been their understanding for years. This was strategic consultation at the highest levels of American politics, with implications that could affect federal policy and electoral outcomes. The foundation of my family's misunderstanding stretched back to my childhood in South Phoenix, where success was measured in concrete terms that everyone could easily understand and explain. In the Reyes household, achievement meant steady employment, home ownership, and the ability to provide for your family without uncertainty or risk. These values had served my parents well as they built their lives from nothing, but they created a framework that couldn't accommodate the kind of career I'd developed. My father Roberto's story shaped our family's entire worldview about work and success. He'd arrived in Phoenix as a teenager with his parents, who came from a small village outside Guadalajara seeking opportunities that didn't exist in their rural Mexican community. Roberto's first job was loading trucks at a produce warehouse, work that required him to wake at 4 in the morning and spend 10 hours handling heavy crates in Phoenix's brutal heat. He never complained about the physical demands or the low wages because he understood that this job was a stepping stone toward something better. Over 15 years, Roberto worked his way up from loading trucks to warehouse supervisor, eventually becoming a foreman for a construction company that specialized in residential developments across the valley. His hands bore permanent evidence of his journey, scarred and calloused from years of manual labor, but he wore these marks with pride because they represented honest work that provided for his family. Every promotion came through dedication and reliability rather than education or connections, creating his deep belief that real success required tangible contributions that others could see and understand. My mother Carmen's path reinforced these same values through different circumstances. She began cleaning houses for wealthy families in Paradise Valley and Scottsdale, work that was physically demanding and often humiliating but paid better than the factory jobs available to women with limited English skills. Carmen took pride in her reputation for excellence, earning trust from clients who gave her keys to their homes and responsibility for maintaining their most private spaces. Her success was measured by client retention, referrals, and the gradual increase in her hourly rates as families competed for her services. Both my parents understood work as a direct exchange of effort for reward, where value was created through visible contributions that solved clear problems. Roberto fixed houses, Carmen cleaned them, and both could point to specific results that justified their compensation. This framework served them well as they saved money, bought their own home, and raised 4 children who they hoped would achieve even greater success through education and opportunity. Their expectations for their children reflected this same practical worldview. Maria's choice to become a registered nurse made perfect sense because hospitals always needed qualified medical professionals, the work directly helped people, and nursing provided stable employment with good benefits. Carlos's move into construction management built on Dad's foundation while adding education and advancement that represented upward mobility. Anna's decision to join the police force concerned them because of the danger, but they understood that communities needed law enforcement and respected the service she provided. My path created confusion from the beginning because communication work didn't fit their framework for understanding value creation. When I explained that I helped companies and organizations craft messages for their audiences, they struggled to identify the specific problem I solved or the tangible product I delivered. "But what do you make?" my father would ask, genuinely trying to understand how words and strategies could generate income. "Who pays money just for talking?" The confusion deepened when I transitioned from traditional public relations to crisis management because the work became even more abstract and confidential. I couldn't explain that I helped wealthy individuals avoid negative media coverage because that required revealing information about my clients that violated professional obligations. I couldn't describe the strategic considerations involved in managing scandals because the cases themselves were private matters that couldn't be discussed publicly. My family's limited exposure to professional crisis management came primarily through television news coverage of political scandals or corporate disasters, where they might hear references to public relations firms or crisis consultants without understanding the actual work involved. To them, these professionals appeared on television to make excuses for powerful people who had made mistakes, which didn't seem like meaningful work that deserved respect or significant compensation. Uncle Victor's skepticism reflected broader family attitudes about work that couldn't be easily categorized or explained. As the eldest of his generation and the most financially successful member of our extended family, his opinions carried significant weight in family discussions about career choices and life decisions. His plumbing business represented the family ideal of entrepreneurship built on providing essential services that people clearly needed and were willing to pay for. "When someone's toilet is broken, they call me, I fix it, they pay me, Uncle," Victor would explain when discussing the nature of valuable work. "Everyone understands what I do and why it matters. But what you're doing, nobody can explain it, including you. How do we know it's real work if you can't tell us what problem you solve?" His questions stung because they contained an element of truth that I couldn't address without violating client confidentiality. I was solving critical problems for people facing existential threats to their careers and reputations, but I couldn't provide specific examples or case studies that would demonstrate the value and sophistication of my work. The success stories that would have validated my expertise were precisely the stories I was paid to keep secret. My siblings' attitudes reflected different aspects of family concern about my unconventional career path. Maria worried about my financial security because nursing had taught her the importance of steady benefits and predictable income. "What happens if you get sick and can't work?" she would ask. "Do you have health insurance? Are you saving for retirement? What if your clients stop hiring you?" Carlos approached my career from his experience in project management, where success was measured through completed developments that could be visited and evaluated. "Show me something you built," he would say, not understanding that my most successful projects were scandals that never became public or crises that were resolved before they damaged my clients' reputations. The absence of visible failure looked like the absence of significant achievement to someone whose work produced houses and commercial buildings. Anna's law enforcement background made her naturally suspicious of work that required extensive secrecy and involved wealthy clients facing legal or ethical challenges. "Why do these people need so much privacy?" she would ask. "If they haven't done anything wrong, why can't you talk about helping them?" Her questions reflected legitimate concerns about the moral implications of my work, but they also demonstrated how my family's values around transparency and accountability conflicted with the discretion that my profession required. The generational divide added another layer of complexity to these family dynamics. My grandparents had immigrated with the belief that hard work and visible achievement would provide security and respect in their new country. They measured success through homeownership, steady employment, and children who surpassed their parents' accomplishments. Their understanding of professional achievement was deeply rooted in tangible contributions that strengthened communities and provided clear value to society. My parents had built on this foundation while adapting to American expectations about education and advancement. They understood that college degrees opened doors to opportunities that hadn't been available to their parents, but they still expected those opportunities to lead to careers that could be easily explained and respected within their community. Professional work meant jobs like teaching, nursing, accounting, or management positions with established companies that provided stability and clear advancement paths. My generation's relationship with work was fundamentally different because we'd grown up with technology, global connectivity, and service economies that created entirely new categories of professional opportunity. The internet had enabled consulting businesses, freelance careers, and specialized expertise that could serve clients across the country without traditional employment structures. But explaining these new professional realities to family members, whose experience was grounded in local, tangible work, remained challenging. The cultural elements of our family's Mexican-American identity added additional dimensions to these career expectations. Traditional gender roles suggested that women should prioritize family stability over professional risk-taking, and my decision to remain single while building a demanding career raised concerns about my personal fulfillment and future security. "When will you settle down and start a family?" became a constant refrain at family gatherings, reflecting genuine concern that my professional focus was preventing me from achieving the personal milestones that defined success in their understanding. Religious influences from our Catholic upbringing emphasized service to others and contributions to community welfare, values that seemed to conflict with my work helping wealthy individuals manage their private problems. While my family could understand Anna's police work as community service and Maria's nursing as caring for the vulnerable, my crisis management career appeared to serve only privileged clients who could afford expensive consultation fees. The economic realities of my family's history also shaped their skepticism about high-income professional work. They had achieved their success through decades of careful saving, modest living, and gradual advancement that built security through consistent effort rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The idea that someone could earn significant income through consultation and strategy seemed inconsistent with their experience of how real wealth was accumulated. These complex family dynamics created a situation where my professional success actually increased the distance between me and my relatives, because I couldn't share the achievements that would have validated my choices or demonstrated the value of my work. Each successful case that I handled discreetly looked like continued underachievement to family members who measured progress through visible milestones and conventional recognition. The systematic underestimation of my career began subtly during my college years but intensified dramatically once I entered the professional world and started making choices that diverged from my family's understanding of career development. Each family gathering became an opportunity for relatives to express concern, offer advice, or make comparisons that reinforced their perception of my professional trajectory as disappointing and unstable. The pattern established itself during my junior year at Arizona State University when I changed my major from business administration to communications. My parents had initially supported the business degree because it seemed practical and likely to lead to management opportunities with established companies. The switch to communications triggered the first serious family intervention about my life choices, with Uncle Victor leading a discussion about the importance of selecting majors that led to clear career paths. "Communications is not a real subject," Uncle Victor declared during a Sunday dinner at my grandmother's house. "What job do you get with a communications degree? What company hires someone just to communicate?" His questions were delivered with the authority of someone who had built a successful business through practical skills and concrete services. You should study something useful like accounting or nursing like your sister. Something that teaches you to do specific work that people need done. My attempts to explain the growing importance of strategic communication in business organizations fell on deaf ears because my family's experience with successful careers didn't include examples of people who were paid primarily for their communication expertise. They understood sales because salespeople could point to products they had sold and commissions they had earned. They understood management because managers supervised teams and oversaw operations with measurable results. His criticism reflected broader family concerns about my financial future, personal relationships, and long-term security that seemed to be threatened by my unconventional career choices. The absence of traditional markers of professional success, like employee benefits, retirement planning, and advancement opportunities within established organizations, suggested to my family that I was avoiding adult responsibilities rather than building alternative forms of security and achievement. The irony was that my work was becoming increasingly sophisticated and financially rewarding during the same period when my family's concerns about my career choices were intensifying. As I developed expertise in crisis management and began serving higher-profile clients, my income grew substantially, but I couldn't share these successes without violating confidentiality agreements that were essential to my professional reputation. The transformation of my modest consulting practice into a sophisticated crisis management operation happened gradually and required developing skills that my family couldn't have imagined when they worried about my unconventional career choices. While they saw someone struggling to find direction after college, I was actually building expertise in one of the most challenging and specialized areas of professional communication, serving clients whose reputation crises could destroy careers, companies, and even political movements within hours if mishandled. My evolution began with a local case that seemed routine but taught me fundamental lessons about the psychology of crisis communication and the strategic thinking required to protect someone's reputation under intense pressure. A prominent Phoenix surgeon had been accused of inappropriate conduct with a patient, and the allegation was about to become public through a medical board investigation that would inevitably attract media attention. The surgeon's attorney referred him to me because traditional public relations firms were reluctant to handle cases involving potential professional misconduct. The situation required delicate navigation between legal constraints, medical privacy regulations, ethical considerations, and media relations, all while protecting the surgeon's ability to continue practicing and supporting his family. I spent weeks developing a communication strategy that acknowledged the seriousness of the allegations while presenting context that demonstrated the surgeon's commitment to patient welfare and professional standards throughout his career. The success of that case taught me that crisis management required a completely different skill set than traditional public relations work. Instead of promoting positive messages about products or services, I was helping people navigate their worst moments when everything they had built was under threat. The work demanded strategic thinking under extreme pressure, sophisticated understanding of media dynamics, and the ability to coordinate complex responses involving legal teams, professional colleagues, and family members. More importantly, I discovered that I had an intuitive understanding of how information moved through communities and how public perception could be influenced through careful messaging and strategic disclosure. When the surgeon's case was resolved without media coverage and his practice continued without interruption, I realized that I had found my professional calling in work that was both intellectually challenging and deeply meaningful to the people I served. The referrals that followed came from attorneys, other medical professionals, and business leaders who had learned about my work through the networks that connected Phoenix's professional community. Each case presented unique challenges that required developing new approaches and expanding my understanding of different industries, regulatory environments, and stakeholder relationships that affected how crises unfolded and could be resolved. A real estate developer facing federal investigation for construction violations needed help managing communications with investors, contractors, and city officials while coordinating with attorneys who were negotiating with prosecutors. A technology executive whose company had suffered a data breach required strategic guidance about customer communication, regulatory compliance, and investor relations that would preserve the company's market position and growth prospects. Each successful case built my reputation within networks of professionals who specialized in high-stakes problem-solving, and my client base gradually shifted from local businesses to regional and national figures whose reputation crises required more sophisticated responses and carried higher stakes for everyone involved. The financial rewards grew correspondingly because clients facing existential threats to their careers or companies were willing to pay premium rates for expertise that could preserve their futures. The confidential nature of this work meant That my professional growth was invisible to my family and friends, creating an increasingly awkward disconnect between my actual achievements and their perception of my career progress. While I was developing into one of the most sought-after crisis management consultants in the Southwest, my family continued to view me as someone who was struggling to find direction and build stability in my professional life. My client list began including celebrities, politicians, and corporate executives whose names would have been recognizable to anyone who followed news or entertainment media, but I couldn't mention these relationships without violating the confidentiality agreements that were essential to my professional reputation. When a country music star needed help managing fallout from a drug arrest, when a prominent attorney faced ethics violations, or when a technology CEO required strategic guidance during a hostile takeover attempt, my family knew nothing about the high-pressure situations I was navigating or the sophisticated strategies I was developing. The psychological demands of crisis management work were unlike anything I had experienced in traditional public relations roles. My clients were typically facing the worst moments of their personal or professional lives, when mistakes or misunderstandings threatened to destroy everything they had worked to build. They needed not just strategic guidance but emotional support from someone who could remain calm and focused while helping them navigate complex decisions under enormous pressure. Learning to provide that level of professional service required developing emotional resilience, strategic thinking abilities, and communication skills that went far beyond anything I had learned in college or my early career experiences. I studied psychology to better understand how people responded to crisis situations. I researched legal principles to coordinate effectively with attorneys who were managing the judicial aspects of my clients' problems. I analyzed media coverage patterns to predict how different disclosure strategies would affect public perception and stakeholder relationships. The financial investment in my own education and professional development was substantial but necessary because the quality of my strategic advice directly affected my clients' ability to preserve their careers and reputations. I attended conferences where crisis management professionals shared case studies and best practices. I hired consultants who specialized in media relations, legal communications, and stakeholder management to help me develop expertise in areas that were critical to comprehensive crisis response. My office setup evolved from a simple home workspace to a sophisticated communication center that could support secure conference calls, encrypted document sharing, and real-time media monitoring. That allowed me to track developing stories and coordinate responses across multiple time zones. The technology investment alone represented more money than my family had ever spent on professional equipment, but it was essential for serving clients whose cases required immediate response and absolute security. The most challenging aspect of my professional development was learning to balance the competing demands of different stakeholders during crisis situations. A single case might involve coordinating communications between my client, their family members, legal counsel, professional colleagues, regulatory agencies, media representatives, and business partners who all had different interests and information needs that had to be managed simultaneously. Developing the strategic thinking skills required for this level of coordination took years of experience and constant learning from each case I handled. I had to understand not just communication principles but legal strategies, business operations, family dynamics, and political considerations that affected how crises unfolded and could be resolved. The intellectual demands were enormous, but they made the work endlessly fascinating and personally rewarding. Helping people navigate their worst moments and preserve their life's work provided meaning and purpose that was deeply fulfilling, even if it required sacrificing some traditional milestones like marriage and children. The most painful aspect of these family interactions was watching my parents' emotional responses as they tried to balance loyalty to me with their own concerns about my life choices. During the bachelor and bachelorette parties in April, I overheard my mother explaining my situation to relatives who hadn't seen me recently. "Sophia is still trying to figure things out," she said, her voice carrying resignation rather than pride. "She's very independent, maybe too independent for her own good." The conversation revealed my mother's internal conflict between respecting my autonomy and worrying that my independence was preventing me from achieving the happiness and security that she wanted for all her children. Her description of me as still trying to figure things out at 32 years old was devastating because it suggested that my parents viewed my professional success as temporary confusion rather than deliberate career development. Meanwhile, my actual work was reaching new levels of complexity and responsibility as my reputation spread through networks of attorneys, executives, and political figures who occasionally required crisis management services. During the same period when my family was intensifying their criticism of my career choices, I was coordinating communications for a congressional candidate whose campaign was threatened by opposition research about his business dealings, managing media strategy for a prominent attorney whose law firm was facing federal investigation, and providing strategic guidance for a technology company whose data security breach had exposed millions of customer records. Each of these cases required sophisticated understanding of legal constraints, regulatory requirements, media dynamics, and stakeholder relationships that affected how crises unfolded and could be resolved. The intellectual demands were enormous, and the financial rewards reflected the specialized expertise that clients needed during their most vulnerable moments. But I couldn't share any information about these professional achievements without violating confidentiality agreements that were essential to my reputation and future business prospects. The isolation created by professional secrecy requirements became particularly difficult during family celebrations where career accomplishments were discussed and compared. At my cousin Miguel's promotion party in May, the conversation focused on his advancement to senior associate at a prestigious law firm and the increased salary and responsibilities that came with his new position. When relatives asked about my work, I provided the same vague explanations about consulting and communication services that had become my standard response to family inquiries. The emotional rewards of successful crisis management were unlike anything I had experienced in other professional roles. When I helped someone preserve their career during their darkest hour, when I prevented a family from losing their reputation and financial security, when I enabled a company to survive a scandal that could have destroyed hundreds of jobs, the satisfaction was profound and lasting. I was providing essential services during people's most vulnerable moments, and the trust they placed in my judgment carried enormous responsibility that I never took lightly. My income grew dramatically as my expertise developed and my reputation spread through the networks of attorneys, executives, and public figures who occasionally needed crisis management services. A single complex case could generate fees that exceeded what my siblings earned in entire years, but I couldn't share these financial achievements with my family without revealing information about specific clients and their situations. The isolation created by professional confidentiality requirements was one of the most difficult aspects of building my career because I couldn't celebrate successes or seek support during challenging periods from the people who mattered most to me personally. When I successfully helped a senator avoid a scandal that could have ended his political career, when I guided a CEO through a hostile takeover that preserved thousands of jobs, when I managed communications for a celebrity whose reputation crisis could have destroyed their entertainment career, my family knew nothing about these achievements or the sophisticated work they represented. The disconnect became particularly painful during family gatherings when relatives expressed concern about my financial security and professional future while I was earning more money and serving more influential clients than anyone in our extended family could have imagined. Their well-meaning advice about finding stable employment and building conventional career security felt increasingly absurd as my consulting practice evolved into one of the most successful crisis management operations in the region. The personal growth that accompanied my professional development was equally significant because crisis management work required developing confidence, decision-making abilities, and emotional strength that served me well beyond my career. Managing high-pressure situations where millions of dollars and people's entire futures hung in the balance taught me to remain calm under stress, think strategically about complex problems, and communicate effectively with people from vastly different backgrounds and professional environments. These skills transformed not just my professional capabilities but my overall approach to life challenges and personal relationships. I became more confident in my judgment, more resilient in the face of criticism or setbacks, and more comfortable with taking calculated risks that could lead to significant rewards. The young woman who had been uncertain about her career direction after college had evolved into a seasoned professional who specialized in helping others navigate their most difficult moments with wisdom and strategic expertise. The months leading up to Rachel's wedding had been particularly challenging for family relationships as my cousin's engagement celebrations provided numerous opportunities for relatives to express their growing frustration with my unconventional lifestyle and apparent lack of progress toward traditional milestones. Each bridal shower, dress fitting, and planning meeting became a forum for well-meaning but increasingly pointed conversations about my future prospects and the need to make more practical life choices. The engagement party in February had been especially difficult because Rachel's future in-laws were successful professionals who naturally asked about family members' careers during introductory conversations. When Rachel's mother-in-law, a prominent pediatrician, inquired about my work, the ensuing explanation was awkward and embarrassing for everyone involved. "Sophia does some kind of consulting work with computers," my mother had said, her voice carrying the apologetic tone that had become familiar whenever my career was discussed. She helps businesses with their communications and marketing projects. The characterization was technically accurate but missed entirely the scope and complexity of the crisis management work that now consumed most of my professional time. I had spent that morning coordinating media strategy for a technology executive whose company was facing a federal investigation, but I couldn't explain this reality without violating confidentiality agreements that were essential to my professional reputation. Instead, I smiled politely and endured the uncomfortable silence that followed my mother's vague description of my work. Uncle Victor had used the engagement party as an opportunity to stage what amounted to a family intervention about my life choices, gathering my parents and siblings for a serious conversation about my need to accept reality and pursue more stable employment. Sophia is 32 years old, he announced to the assembled group, his voice carrying the authority of the family patriarch. She's been playing games with this consulting business for years, but where has it gotten her? She's still single. Still living alone, still pretending that working from home is a real career. His assessment stung because it contained elements of truth that I couldn't contradict without revealing information about my actual professional achievements and financial situation. I was indeed single, having prioritized career development over romantic relationships during the intense years when I was building my expertise in crisis management. I did work primarily from home, though my home office was actually a sophisticated communication center equipped with secure technology that enabled me to coordinate complex responses for clients across multiple time zones. The intervention continued with suggestions from various family members about career alternatives that would provide stability and respectability within their understanding of professional success. Maria proposed that I consider returning to school for a practical degree like nursing or teaching, fields that would guarantee steady employment and community respect. Carlos suggested that I apply for marketing positions with established companies, where I could use my communication skills while enjoying the security of regular paychecks and employee benefits. Anna's contribution reflected her law enforcement perspective and natural skepticism about work that required extensive secrecy. I still don't understand why you can't tell us who your clients are or what specific problems you solve for them, she said during the family discussion. Legitimate businesses don't usually require that level of confidentiality unless there's something questionable about the work involved. Her suspicions weren't entirely unfounded because many of my clients were indeed facing legal, ethical, or professional challenges that threatened their reputations and careers. However, the confidentiality requirements existed to protect my clients' privacy during vulnerable moments rather than to conceal illegal or unethical activities. I was helping people navigate legitimate crisis situations, but explaining this distinction required providing details about specific cases that I couldn't legally or professionally disclose. The family conversation concluded with Uncle Victor's declaration that he would no longer enable what he viewed as my avoidance of adult responsibilities. I've offered Sophia work at my business several times, and she's always had excuses about why honest employment isn't good enough for her, he told my parents. I'm done pretending that whatever she's doing is a real career. She needs to face reality and find stable work before it's too late to build any kind of future. His ultimatum created additional pressure on my parents, who found themselves caught between supporting their daughter's choices and acknowledging their brother's legitimate concerns about my unconventional path. The stress was visible during subsequent family interactions as my mother struggled to defend my career decisions, while privately worrying about my long-term financial security and personal fulfillment. The wedding planning process intensified these family tensions because Rachel's celebration required months of coordinated activities that brought our extended family together regularly. At the bridal shower in March, I found myself seated with my grandmother and great-aunts, elderly women whose understanding of women's roles was shaped by experiences from a different era. Their questions about my marital status and career goals were gentle but persistent, reflecting genuine concern about my deviation from traditional life patterns. Mija, when I was your age, I already had 4 children and was helping your grandfather build his business, my grandmother said while we arranged flowers for centerpieces. I understand that women have more opportunities now, but family is still the most important thing. Career success doesn't mean much if you don't have anyone to share it with. Her observation contained wisdom about life priorities, but it also reflected assumptions about the relationship between professional achievement and personal fulfillment that didn't account for the satisfaction I derived from my crisis management work. Uncle Victor's commentary during Miguel's celebration was especially pointed and personal. Look at Miguel, he said, addressing the room but clearly directing his words toward me. 7 years out of law school and he's already a senior associate, making 6 figures. That's what happens when you choose a real profession and work hard to advance within it. Some people understand how success works, and others just pretend they're building something while accomplishing nothing. His comparison was particularly frustrating because my income had actually surpassed Miguel's by a significant margin, but I couldn't defend myself without revealing information about my financial situation that would prompt questions I couldn't answer. The irony was that Uncle Victor was using Miguel's conventional success to criticize my unconventional path while being completely unaware that my pretend career was generating substantially more income than the real profession he was celebrating. The pattern continued through the summer as wedding preparations intensified and family gatherings became more frequent. Each interaction reinforced my relatives' perception of me as someone who had failed to launch into adult responsibilities and meaningful career development. Their concern was genuine and their advice was offered with love, but their inability to understand my actual professional achievements created an increasingly painful disconnect between their perception and my reality. The bachelor party weekend in Las Vegas provided Uncle Victor with another opportunity to express his disappointment in my life choices during conversations with male relatives who shared his perspective about career development and traditional markers of success. According to my brother Carlos, the discussion focused on my need to stop playing games and find real work before I became too old to build meaningful career prospects or attract a suitable husband. The characterization of my work as playing games was particularly hurtful because it minimized the sophisticated strategic thinking and emotional resilience required for effective crisis management. While my male relatives were gambling and drinking in Las Vegas, I was coordinating emergency communications for a pharmaceutical company whose clinical trial results had leaked prematurely, threatening both the company's stock price and the future of a promising medical treatment. The contrast between their perception of my professional seriousness and the actual responsibility I carried during that weekend illustrated the fundamental misunderstanding that had developed between my family and me over years of necessary secrecy about my work. They saw someone who was avoiding conventional employment and adult responsibilities, while I was actually managing crises that affected thousands of jobs, millions of dollars in investments, and the careers of prominent figures in business and politics. The final escalation occurred during the rehearsal dinner the night before Rachel's wedding, when Uncle Victor's alcohol consumption lowered his inhibitions and enabled him to express his frustrations about my career choices with unprecedented directness. "I don't understand why we keep pretending that Sophia has a real job," he announced to our family table during dinner. "She's been fooling around with this consulting nonsense for years, and what does she have to show for it? No husband, no children, no career advancement, no financial security." His assessment was delivered loudly enough for other tables to hear, creating embarrassment for my parents and prompting uncomfortable silence from relatives who agreed with his concerns but recognized the inappropriate timing of his public criticism. Rachel looked mortified that her rehearsal dinner was being disrupted by family drama, while her future in-laws appeared confused by the sudden tension at our supposedly celebratory gathering. "Maybe it's time for Sophia to accept that her experiment with independence isn't working and find stable employment like the rest of us," Uncle Victor continued, apparently unaware that his voice was carrying across the restaurant. "Some people are cut out for entrepreneurship and some people aren't. There's no shame in admitting that you need structure and supervision to be productive." The public nature of his criticism was humiliating and demonstrated how completely my family misunderstood both my professional capabilities and my actual achievements. While Uncle Victor was questioning my ability to succeed without supervision, I was actually managing my own business that employed 3 full-time security professionals and generated more annual revenue than his plumbing company had ever achieved. The evening concluded with my mother's tearful apology for her brother's behavior and her promise that family dynamics would improve once the wedding stress was over. But the damage had been done, and I drove home from the rehearsal dinner understanding that the gap between my family's perception and my professional reality had become unsustainable. The irony was that Uncle Victor's public humiliation at the rehearsal dinner occurred less than 24 hours before the wedding reception, where my actual professional status would be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. His confident criticism of my career choices was about to be exposed as completely unfounded, but neither of us knew that my security team was already coordinating communications for a crisis situation that would demonstrate the scope and importance of my work to my entire extended family. The Fairmont Princess Resort represented the pinnacle of luxury wedding venues in the Phoenix metropolitan area, with its distinctive architecture rising from the Sonoran Desert like a modernist interpretation of ancient Pueblo buildings. Rachel had dreamed of holding her wedding there since childhood, and the venue's reputation for sophisticated celebrations made it the perfect setting for what was intended to be the social event of the year for our extended family. I arrived at the resort that Saturday morning feeling a complex mixture of excitement for Rachel's special day and apprehension about spending another extended period with relatives whose understanding of my life remained so fundamentally incorrect. The previous night's rehearsal dinner had demonstrated that Uncle Victor's criticism of my career choices was intensifying rather than diminishing, and I anticipated another day of deflecting questions and enduring well-meaning but misguided advice about my professional future. The bridal suite buzzed with activity as Rachel and her bridesmaids prepared for the ceremony, surrounded by professional stylists, photographers, and wedding coordinators who orchestrated the morning's activities with military precision. As one of 4 bridesmaids, I participated in the traditional pre-wedding rituals while discreetly monitoring my phone for updates about developing situations that might require my professional attention during the celebration. My security team had clear instructions about maintaining low profiles during family events, but they remained on standby for emergency situations that required immediate response regardless of timing or location. Marcus, James, and David were positioned at various locations around the Phoenix area, ready to coordinate rapid communications if any of my clients faced crisis situations that demanded urgent strategic intervention. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I helped Rachel into her wedding dress while simultaneously tracking a developing scandal involving a prominent technology executive whose company had just disclosed a significant data breach. My phone buzzed with encrypted messages about media inquiries, regulatory concerns, and investor relations challenges that required strategic coordination, but I maintained my focus on Rachel's preparation while my team handled preliminary responses. Rachel's nervousness about the ceremony was palpable as she reviewed her vows and checked her appearance in the suite's floor-length mirrors. Her wedding represented the culmination of a 7-year relationship with David, a successful engineer, whose stable career and conventional life goals had earned enthusiastic approval from our entire extended family. Their love story embodied everything my relatives valued about romantic relationships and marriage, creating a stark contrast with my own single status that would inevitably prompt commentary throughout the day. The ceremony itself unfolded flawlessly. In the resort's garden pavilion, with 200 guests witnessing Rachel and David exchange vows against a backdrop of desert mountains and carefully manicured landscaping, I stood at the altar alongside the other bridesmaids, genuinely moved by the couple's obvious devotion while simultaneously calculating whether I could discreetly check my secure phone during the reception for updates about the technology crisis that was developing in real time. Following the ceremony, guests moved to the resort's cocktail terrace for drinks and appetizers while the wedding party participated in formal photography sessions throughout the property. The photographer directed us through numerous poses in various locations, capturing images that would preserve memories of this celebration for decades to come. Between photo sessions, I managed to review several urgent messages about media strategy and stakeholder communications that required my input for successful crisis resolution. The reception moved indoors to the resort's grand ballroom, a magnificent space decorated with elaborate floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and elegant table settings that reflected months of careful planning and significant financial investment. The room could accommodate 300 guests for dinner and dancing, though Rachel's celebration was more intimate with roughly 200 family members and friends representing various aspects of the couple's personal and professional lives. Our extended family occupied 3 round tables positioned prominently near the head table, with seating arrangements that reflected traditional hierarchy and family relationships. My parents sat with Uncle Victor and Aunt Elena at the main family table, joined by my siblings and their spouses in recognition of their married status and conventional life achievements. I found myself assigned to what everyone still called the kids' table, despite being 32 years old, seated with teenage cousins and young adult relatives who seemed equally surprised by the placement. The table assignments reflected my family's continued perception of me as someone who hadn't achieved adult milestones that warranted inclusion with the successfully married couples and established professionals at the main family tables. While the placement was technically logical given my single status, it reinforced my position as the family outlier whose unconventional choices had prevented me from advancing to more respectable seating arrangements. My tablemates included Rachel's youngest sister Maria, a high school senior planning to study nursing at Arizona State University, my cousin Roberto, a 24-year-old community college student pursuing certification in automotive technology, and several family friends' children whose ages ranged from 16 to 25. The conversation naturally focused on college plans, part-time jobs, and entry-level career aspirations that seemed appropriate for a table of young people beginning their adult lives. The irony of discussing career development with teenagers while I was simultaneously managing a multi-million-dollar crisis consultation wasn't lost on me, but I participated in the conversation while discreetly monitoring my phone for updates about the technology situation that was requiring strategic coordination with attorneys, regulatory officials, and media representatives across multiple time zones. Dinner service began with champagne toasts that celebrated the couple's achievements and bright future together, followed by elaborate courses that showcased the resort's culinary expertise and justified the significant cost of hosting a wedding at such a prestigious venue. The meal provided opportunities for extended conversation as relatives caught up on family news and shared updates about their personal and professional developments. The discourse at nearby tables focused on conventional markers of success and advancement that my family understood and valued. My cousin Miguel discussed his recent promotion at the law firm where he worked, detailing increased responsibilities and compensation that demonstrated his progress within the legal profession. My sister Maria described new programs at the hospital, where she worked as a registered nurse, highlighting her expertise in pediatric care and her contributions to patient outcomes. Meanwhile, at the kids' table, I found myself explaining college majors and career options to teenagers while simultaneously coordinating strategic communications for a crisis that involved federal regulatory agencies, national media outlets, and corporate executives whose careers hung in the balance. The contrast between the conversation I was having and the work I was managing illustrated the fundamental disconnect between my family's perception of my professional status and the reality of my daily responsibilities. Uncle Victor's voice carried across the nearby tables as he shared his perspective about career development and the importance of building solid foundations through conventional employment. His commentary included pointed references to young people who thought they were too good for traditional work and the dangers of pursuing unrealistic dreams instead of accepting practical opportunities that provided stability and security. His observations were clearly directed toward me, though he maintained the pretense of offering general advice about career development to the assembled family members. Several relatives nodded in agreement with his assessment, reinforcing the consensus that my unconventional path represented poor judgment and unrealistic expectations about professional success. The wedding celebration continued with dancing, additional toasts, and the traditional activities that marked milestone moments in the evening's festivities. Rachel and David's first dance was followed by parent dances and general celebration as guests enjoyed the music and social interactions that made weddings memorable for families and friends. I participated in the dancing and conversation while maintaining awareness of the developing crisis situation that my team was monitoring and coordinating. The technology executive's company was facing increasingly serious media scrutiny, and preliminary discussions with regulatory officials suggested that federal investigation was likely unless we could demonstrate proactive compliance efforts and transparent communication about the data breach incident. The complexity of managing crisis communications during a family wedding illustrated the challenging balance between personal and professional responsibilities that defined my daily life. While my relatives celebrated and socialized, unaware of the sophisticated work I was managing discreetly, I was coordinating strategic responses that would determine whether a major technology company survived a scandal that could destroy thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in shareholder value. As the evening progressed, Uncle Victor's alcohol consumption appeared to be affecting his judgment and lowering his inhibitions about expressing his opinions regarding family members' life choices. His commentary became increasingly pointed and personal, focusing on the need for certain people to accept reality about their limitations and pursue more practical paths toward stability and respectability. The tension in the room was building toward a confrontation that seemed inevitable given Uncle Victor's growing boldness and my own frustration with years of family criticism that was based on complete misunderstanding of my professional achievements. The stage was set for a dramatic revelation that would forever change how my extended family understood my place in their hierarchy of success and respectability. The beautiful ballroom, elegant celebration, and family gathering provided the perfect backdrop for a moment of truth that would expose the gap between perception and reality in the most dramatic way possible. Neither Uncle Victor nor anyone else at the reception could have anticipated that my worthless career was about to be revealed as something far more significant and impressive than anything they had imagined. The moment that shattered years of accumulated family tension began during what should have been the most joyful part of Rachel's wedding reception. The dinner courses had been served, the formal toasts had concluded, and guests were settling into the relaxed social atmosphere that typically characterized the latter portion of wedding celebrations. Our family tables buzzed with conversation about the beautiful ceremony, Rachel's radiant happiness, and the promising future that awaited the newlyweds. Uncle Victor had consumed several glasses of wine throughout the evening, and his commentary about family values and career development had grown progressively louder and more pointed as the alcohol affected his usual restraint. He moved between tables like a patriarch making pronouncements, sharing wisdom with anyone within earshot about the importance of building solid foundations and making responsible life choices. At the main family table, his voice carried clearly, as he discussed the virtues of traditional employment and the dangers of pursuing unrealistic dreams instead of accepting practical opportunities. "Look at this celebration," he said, gesturing broadly around the elegant ballroom. "Rachel and David can afford this kind of wedding because they made smart career choices. They built something real together, something that provides security and future prospects." His commentary naturally led to comparisons between family members who had achieved conventional success and those who had not, with my unconventional career path serving as the obvious example of poor decision-making and unrealistic expectations. Several relatives nodded in agreement as Uncle Victor outlined his philosophy about work, responsibility, and the markers of genuine achievement. "Some people understand that success requires discipline and practical thinking," he continued, his voice growing louder as wine influenced his judgment. "They choose careers that provide stability, build relationships that create families, and contribute meaningfully to their communities. Others spend years chasing fantasies and avoiding adult responsibilities." The implicit criticism was becoming explicit as Uncle Victor's gaze moved toward the kids' table where I sat with teenagers and young adults who were beginning their own career development journeys. His expression suggested that he viewed this seating arrangement as appropriate given my failure to achieve the milestones that would warrant inclusion with the successfully established family members. I felt my phone vibrate with an encrypted message from Marcus about the developing technology crisis, but I resisted the urge to check it while Uncle Victor was clearly building toward a more direct confrontation about my life choices. The irony was overwhelming as I prepared to endure another lecture about career failure while simultaneously managing communications that would determine whether a Fortune 500 company survived a scandal that threatened its very existence. 32 years old and still sitting at the kids' table, Uncle Victor announced, his voice now clearly audible to neighboring tables as other guests began noticing the family drama that was unfolding. "That should tell everyone something about the consequences of refusing to grow up and accept reality about career development." Rachel looked mortified as her reception became the backdrop for family conflict, while her new husband appeared confused by the sudden tension that was disrupting their celebration. Other guests turned their attention toward our tables, sensing that something significant was happening but uncertain about the nature of the conflict they were witnessing. Uncle Victor wasn't finished with his assessment of my life choices and their implications for family respectability. The alcohol had clearly lowered his inhibitions about expressing opinions that he typically kept private, and the wedding setting seemed to have triggered his desire to make a definitive statement about success, failure, and family expectations. "You know what the real problem is?" he said, standing up from his chair and addressing the room with the confidence of someone who believed his audience agreed with his perspective. "Some people think they're too good for honest work. They want everything handed to them without earning it through discipline and dedication." His speech was attracting attention from tables throughout the ballroom as other wedding guests realized that a family confrontation was developing during what should have been a purely celebratory evening. The elegant atmosphere that Rachel had planned so carefully was being disrupted by personal conflict that threatened to overshadow her special day. "Look around this room," Uncle Victor continued, gesturing toward the successful couples and established professionals who filled the reception tables. "Everyone here built something real through hard work and smart choices. They chose careers that matter, relationships that last, and paths that contribute value to society." The contrast he was drawing was becoming increasingly obvious as his attention focused more directly on my table and my apparent failure to achieve similar milestones. My teenage tablemates stared at their plates in embarrassment while young adult relatives appeared mortified by the public nature of the criticism that was being directed toward their cousin. "But some people prefer to live in fantasy worlds where they pretend that playing on computers is a real career," Uncle Victor said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom as conversations stopped and guests focused on the family drama that was unfolding, where they think they can avoid adult responsibilities and still deserve respect and recognition. The personal attack was devastating in its directness and its public nature, delivered in front of 200 wedding guests who were witnessing my humiliation at what should have been a family celebration. My parents' faces reflected horror at their brother's cruelty and embarrassment at the scene he was creating, while my siblings appeared torn between defending me and avoiding further conflict. 32 years old with nothing to show for it, Uncle Victor continued, apparently oblivious to the damage he was causing to family relationships and Rachel's wedding reception. No husband, no children, no real career, no meaningful contributions to anything or anyone. Just expensive clothes she can't afford and pretensions about being some kind of professional. The reference to my outfit was particularly cruel because I had deliberately chosen modest attire to avoid prompting questions about my spending habits or financial situation. The navy dress I wore was elegant but not obviously expensive, selected specifically to prevent the kind of scrutiny that might reveal the disconnect between my family's perception of my finances and my actual economic circumstances. Completely worthless, Uncle Victor concluded, the words hitting like physical blows as they echoed across the silent ballroom. That's what happens when you refuse to build anything real or contribute anything meaningful to the world. When you choose fantasy over responsibility and expect everyone else to pretend it's admirable. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable as 200 guests processed what they had just witnessed. The elegant wedding reception had been transformed into a forum for family dysfunction, with my public humiliation serving as entertainment for relatives and strangers, who were now staring at me with mixtures of pity, curiosity, and judgment. I felt tears building behind my eyes as years of accumulated hurt and frustration threatened to overwhelm my composure. The man who had questioned my worth since college was now declaring me worthless in front of everyone who mattered to me personally. And I had no way to defend myself without violating the confidentiality agreements that protected my professional reputation and my client's privacy. My phone buzzed again with what I knew was an urgent message about the technology crisis that required immediate strategic intervention, but I couldn't focus on professional responsibilities while my personal world was collapsing around me. The disconnect between my actual professional status and my family's perception had never been more painful or more publicly humiliating. I was reaching for my purse, prepared to leave the reception and possibly never return to another family gathering, when I felt a familiar presence behind my chair. Marcus materialized beside me with the silent professionalism that had made him invaluable during countless high-pressure situations, his appearance so sudden and unexpected that it seemed almost supernatural. Ms. Reyes, he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by our table but maintaining the discretion that characterized all his professional interactions. We have a developing situation that requires your immediate attention. Senator Harrison's office has received inquiries from the Washington Post regarding the Foundation investigation. The effect of his words was instantaneous and electric. Uncle Victor's confident expression faltered as he processed this unexpected interruption from someone he didn't recognize and couldn't categorize within his understanding of wedding receptions and family gatherings. The teenagers at my table looked up with sudden interest, while guests at neighboring tables began paying closer attention to what had shifted from family drama to something entirely different and intriguing. Marcus continued with the calm professionalism that characterized his approach to crisis communications, seemingly unaware that he was about to detonate a revelation that would reshape my entire family's understanding of their supposedly worthless relative. Mrs. Harrison is requesting immediate strategic consultation regarding media response protocols. She's authorized emergency measures and is standing by for your guidance. The transformation of the ballroom's atmosphere was immediate and palpable, as Marcus's words introduced an element that no one at the wedding reception could have anticipated or understood. Uncle Victor's confident demeanor crumbled as he struggled to process the appearance of this impeccably dressed professional who was addressing me with obvious deference and urgency about matters that sounded far more serious and sophisticated than anything he associated with my supposed career. Behind Marcus, I could see James and David positioning themselves discreetly near the ballroom's entrances, their presence becoming noticeable to guests who were now paying attention to details they had previously overlooked. The three men wore identical black suits that were clearly expensive and perfectly tailored, and they carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of security professionals who were accustomed to high-pressure situations and important clients. Rachel abandoned her conversations with other tables and moved quickly toward our family area, her wedding dress rustling as she navigated between chairs and guests who were straining to understand what was happening. Her face reflected confusion and concern as she watched her cousin's table become the focal point of attention for reasons that seemed completely disconnected from anything she knew about my life or career. My parents leaned forward from the main family table, their expressions shifting from embarrassment about Uncle Victor's public criticism to bewilderment about this unexpected development that they couldn't explain or categorize. My mother's hand moved to cover her mouth in shock, as she began to realize that something fundamental about their understanding of my professional life was about to be challenged. Marcus handed me a secure phone with the efficiency of someone who had performed similar handoffs during countless crisis situations. Mrs. Harrison is on encrypted line 1, he said, his voice remaining calm and professional despite the obvious attention his presence was attracting. She's confirmed that the Washington Post plans to publish their investigation of the foundation's donor relationships within 90 minutes unless we can provide alternative narrative frameworks. The complexity of the situation he was describing began to register with family members who had sufficient professional experience to recognize the terminology and implications. My cousin Miguel, the attorney, straightened in his chair as he processed references to media strategy, donor privacy, and strategic communications that suggested a level of sophisticated crisis management he hadn't associated with my work. Uncle Victor found his voice first, though it emerged as a confused stammer rather than his previous confident pronouncements. "Who are you people? What are you talking about? Sophia doesn't work for any senator or foundation." Marcus turned to address him with the polite professionalism that characterized his interactions with clients' family members who lacked security clearance or need-to-know access to sensitive information. "Private security and communications coordination, sir. Ms. Reyes specializes in crisis management for high-profile political and corporate clients who require immediate strategic response during reputation threats." The words hung in the ballroom, air like smoke after an explosion, creating a silence that was even more profound than the uncomfortable quiet that had followed Uncle Victor's cruel assessment of my worth. Guests at nearby tables had stopped their conversations entirely, straining to hear and understand what was unfolding at our family gathering. James approached our table with a tablet displaying what appeared to be financial authorization documents and communication protocols. "Ms. Reyes, Mrs. Harrison has approved the emergency retainer at standard crisis rates," he said, his voice carrying across the silent space. $3.2 million for comprehensive reputation management over the next 72 hours, including media coordination, stakeholder communications, and federal compliance consultation. The number struck the reception like a physical force, causing audible gasps from relatives and wedding guests who had been following the conversation. Several people repeated the figure in whispered disbelief, while others reached for their phones to begin researching my name and professional background online. Uncle Victor's face cycled through several color changes as he attempted to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about my career and professional capabilities. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, while his confident bearing dissolved into confusion and dawning embarrassment about the public criticism he had just delivered. David, the third member of my security team, materialized with additional updates that further demonstrated the scope and urgency of the crisis situation I was managing. "Ma'am, we've confirmed that ABC News is also pursuing the foundation story," he reported with professional efficiency. "Their congressional correspondent has been calling Senator Harrison's office since this morning requesting comment about potential ethics violations." The mention of multiple national media outlets and ethics investigations created another wave of shocked murmurs throughout the ballroom as wedding guests began to understand that they were witnessing the coordination of a major political crisis in real time. The elegant reception had been transformed into an impromptu crisis command center, with my security team efficiently managing communications while my family grappled with revelations that shattered their understanding of my professional status. My sister Anna, with her law enforcement background, was among the first to grasp the implications of what she was hearing. "Sophia, are you telling us that you work for United States senators?" she asked, her voice carrying across the family tables. "That you manage political crises for people in Washington?" Before I could respond, Marcus provided additional context that made the situation even more dramatic and impressive. "Ms. Reyes maintains an exclusive client list of elected officials, Fortune 500 executives, and entertainment industry figures who require discreet crisis management services," he explained. To my stunned family, when powerful people face career-ending scandals, they hire her because she's recognized as one of the most effective reputation specialists in the country. The ballroom had essentially stopped functioning as a wedding reception and become an audience for a revelation that was rewriting everything my family thought they knew about their supposedly unsuccessful relative. Conversations at other tables had ceased entirely as guests watched my relatives process information that transformed their understanding of family hierarchy and professional achievement. Rachel finally reached our table, her face flushed from hurrying across the ballroom in her elaborate wedding dress. "Sophia, what's happening?" she asked, her voice reflecting genuine confusion and concern. "These men are saying you work for senators and manage political scandals? I don't understand. What's going on?" The innocent bewilderment in her voice captured the collective confusion of my entire extended family as they struggled to reconcile years of assumptions about my career with evidence that I was actually one of the most successful and influential professionals among all our relatives. The kids' table placement that had seemed appropriate for someone who hadn't achieved adult milestones suddenly appeared absurd when viewed against the reality of my actual professional responsibilities. James handed me an earpiece and gestured toward the secure phone, his movements efficient and professional despite the unprecedented setting for crisis coordination. "Mrs. Harrison is requesting immediate strategic consultation," he said. "The Senator's Chief of Staff is standing by, and his Communications Director is en route to Washington for emergency media briefings." The reference to high-level political staff and emergency communications protocols provided additional evidence of the sophisticated nature of my work and the trust that prominent figures placed in my judgment during their most vulnerable moments. My family was witnessing the kind of responsibility and influence that they had never imagined I possessed. Uncle Victor finally managed to speak, though his voice had lost all traces of its previous confidence and authority. "This is impossible," he said weakly, his earlier pronouncements about my worthlessness now appearing ridiculous in light of what was being revealed. "Sophia can't be working for senators and managing political crises. She's just a freelance consultant who works from home." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.